So welcome everybody to WEM Live session number 20, which seems to be quite a journey. We started these sessions at the beginning of lockdown and we've done them pretty regularly all the way through. And now have reached the auspicious number of 20, which seems quite incredible. We're learning a lot about the technology that goes behind this, so you'll have to excuse me if we, Nathan and I both have thunderstorms at our end, so if we cut out, then we'll make sure that we get back online as soon as we can. We're also broadcasting to the WEM page on WEM Live on Facebook, so hello to everybody there. But what this session is about finding your why expedition medicine, extreme medicine is so important, we believe, to both you personally as clinicians and medics, but also to your career. So this is about, as I mentioned, this is about the why. Why is expedition medicine important? We started, what's now called World Extreme Medicine 20 years ago, and it was very much around the fact that we felt that medicine was becoming increasingly more specialized for very logical and very good reasons. But we felt it actually was doing medics a disservice in so much as it was pushing people down a very narrow pathway where actually the benefit was from doing expedition medicine, you could combine your medical training and your knowledge and expertise and take it out into the field. But in returning to medicine in hospital medicine or primary care or in paramedicine, it would bring in the skills that you learn in the outdoor environment on expeditions in extreme environments are actually equally important, equally valuable in your everyday career. And we felt that medics taking part in extreme medicine, and whether that was expedition medicine, humanitarian medicine, disaster medicine, we're actually returning to medicine better medics, better team leaders, better problem solvers, with a better appreciation of the systems that they were working in. And it gives me really great pleasure to welcome Nathan, who's a junior doctor in an emergency department in London, who's very successfully combined medicine with his personal medical career. And the interesting touch points that we found is that actually the very reasons we set up extreme medicine almost 20 years ago are elucidated by Nathan in why he has embraced expedition medicine into his career. So Nathan, it's our honor to have you here, and we're really very much looking forward to your presentation this evening. So without further ado, because nobody wants to listen to me, they want to listen to you. Nathan, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for that very humbling introduction. I'd just like to say a massive thank you to yourself and to World Extreme Medicine for having me on to talk. It's a great honor. And it's amazing to be talking to so many people from around the world, such an international audience to go with the World Extreme Medicine. So that's fantastic. We first spoke, it was a couple of months ago now, wasn't it? And I think I dropped you a message on Instagram or so, I can't remember exactly, but anyway, we ended up having a chat on the phone, and I was saying a bit about why expedition medicine was so important. I think not just for a free holiday up Kilimanjaro, but actually as a fundamental part of my career. And it was a really interesting conversation, because as we were talking, it sounded like everything I was thinking now was exactly the same things you were thinking 20 years ago when you set up WEM, and it's what you found over the years. So I felt like we were singing from the same hymn sheet on a lot of things. So I'm delighted to be here to be able to talk a little bit about my journey and hopefully inspire some of you guys here today to just have a pause and have a think about why you do what you do, essentially. So just to get started then, so this talk is titled Expedition Medicine, Finding Your Why. But it's not just about expedition medicine. There's a lot of the lessons here that can apply whether you are, whether you're a doctor, a nurse, paramedic, or actually whether you are not in the medicine field at all, whether you're doing some other career or actually just going along in life. There's a few sort of lessons that are hopefully valuable to everyone. So to begin, I thought we'll just hit the rewind button, and we're going to go all the way back to the beginning of typical life journey, when we sort of by some strange set of circumstances end up coming out of the womb and saying hello to this amazing world that we live in. And start life as a little toddler, and this will be my journey, and it's quite typical, but it certainly won't apply to everyone. But I think everyone should be able to see some similarities. So at age of 5, you start primary school, and you have this amazing view of the world. You know, absolutely anything is possible. And you're always really inquisitive. You're always asking why. And when people say to you, what do you want to be when you're older? You come up with the most bizarre ideas. So I remember when I was 5, or at least so I'm told, if someone asked me, what do you want to be when you're older? I said I wanted to be a penguin. I mean, that is ridiculous. Like, I've got no idea why anyone would want to be a penguin. But there's this amazing mind, and you're very open to any possibility, and anything's possible. But you get a little bit older, and the possibilities sort of narrow down. I realized that being a penguin probably wasn't practical, let alone feasible. And so I decided that, you know, I thought it'd be really cool to be an astronaut, you know, go to space. And that dream sort of fairly quickly went to bed, although I must say that is starting to come back with my recent sort of career pathway. But you essentially, your worldview kind of subtracts. It goes from thinking you can be a penguin to an astronaut to slightly smaller and smaller things. And age 12, I went to secondary school, and I remember being asked around that age, you know, what do you want to do when you're older? And I said I wanted to be a fund manager, because I'd heard that they make a lot of money. And I don't even know what a fund manager does now, let alone back then. It's completely meaningless to me. But again, you know, I got to the age of sort of 14, and then I'm deciding what I'm doing 2 years ahead for my GCSEs. And then suddenly at the age of 16, I'm deciding what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And I tried a bit of work experience here and there, and you know, I'd always quite liked the sciences. You know, I quite liked that you could have a clear answer to things, supposedly. And I like talking to people, and medicine seemed like an obvious choice. My parents were doctors, so I kind of knew what that meant. And so I found myself going to medical school at the age of 18. And in medical school, you have to make some decisions every now and again. You have to decide what you're going to do for your intercalated degree, perhaps, you know, and then as you get a bit later, you might decide what you're going to do for your student selected components. And you're making smaller and smaller decisions. So, you know, when you're age 5, you're trying to think about what you're going to do for your entire life. And when you're 14, you're thinking about the next couple of years. And when you're at university, you're thinking about what are the choices I need to make now that are going to dictate how my next few months run. And suddenly you have been on a treadmill for 24, 25, 26 years. You've been putting one step in front of the other, one foot in front of the other, and you always know what is going to happen when August comes around, the start of the new academic year. And it's quite familiar. It's a familiar place to be. It feels safe. You know, you've got to this age without anything too drastically, too many drastic disasters, hopefully. And it's a very sort of familiar place to be. But university, you do your F1, you do your F2, you do your junior nursing years, your paramedic training, whatever it is, your graduate scheme. And suddenly you come to the end of this road that has been set out essentially for you as a result of the education system. And you find yourself standing at the end of this pathway, looking out at the entire rest of your life. You've got the whole world in front of you. And it's an incredibly daunting position to be in. It's really scary because there are an unlimited number of possibilities, and there's an unlimited number of different pathways you can take. And it's really, really scary because you've never been in that situation before. You've never got to this point where you have to think, you know, the decision I make now could impact on the entire rest of my life. And so what do we tend to do when we're faced with a scary situation, or an unfamiliar situation? What we do is we tend to go back onto the thing that we've done 100 times before. You know, we do the thing that we know best. And in the case of life and the education system, that is generally a case of getting back on the treadmill. And you've reached the age of 26, and suddenly it's, you know, the decision you make next, in the case of specialty training as a medic, might last you 7-8 years, and suddenly you'll pop out at the age of 35. So actually the decision you're making as a medical student, which will tie you over for a year, compared to the decision you're making at the end of your F2 year, you know, deciding what specialty to go in as a nurse, for example, that decision then is going to last you 10 years. And in that 10 years, a lot of things can happen. You can get married, you can have kids, you can have a mortgage, you can have bills. There's so many commitments that are having an impact on your decision. It's not just the world is this crazy big place, even though it is, as demonstrated in this picture here from Ecuador. Suddenly it feels very, very much more narrow, and we have to choose the option that gives us the greatest chance of success and being able to meet those commitments. And so essentially we do the thing that is most familiar to us, and we get back on the treadmill. And that is what so many medics do, and so many people coming out of graduate schemes do. They realize that, oh, I don't know how to deal with uncertainty. I don't know what is next for me. And so I'm going to apply for jobs and see what I get. And I know people in the non-medical world who do exactly this. And I've got lots of medical friends who, coming up to the end of F2, they were essentially pinning the entire rest of their life on, how an interview went. And essentially, I've got a couple of friends who applied for pediatrics and obs and gynae and GP, and the decision of what they're going to spend the rest of their life doing essentially came down to their interview performance. And that might be, a result of how much coffee you've had that day or how much sleep you had the night before. It might be the mood of the person doing the interview, for example. So it's a heck of a big decision to rest on that small chance, essentially. But that is what we're comfortable doing. We're comfortable getting back on the treadmill. Just, it doesn't matter what comes next, as long as that next step is there. It's where we feel comfortable. The trouble is, if you spend your entire life on the treadmill and you never once step off to take a look around, you might realize that you actually flipping love the rowing machine, but you just never knew it because you didn't even know it existed. It's a dubious analogy because no one loves the rowing machine, but anyway, let's put that to bed. So eventually things seem like they're okay. You get back on the treadmill, you apply for a few different things, you get an obs and gynae training number, brilliant, you'll crack on with it. And lots of people have done this before, so you think everything is going to go well. But of course, life doesn't work out that way. And this is something that traditional medical training and a lot of career development things sort of fail to recognize, is that just staying on the treadmill because that's what's familiar doesn't necessarily mean that's going to lead to a successful career. And eventually things go wrong or don't go as we expect. Just for a bit of context, this picture here shows Mount Kilimanjaro. It's where all the evacuation stretchers are kept. And it's just down from the base camp. And if something goes wrong, you have to sort of walk someone down and plonk them on this one-wheeled stretcher and wheel them off down the mountain. Anyway, you'll see I've put quite a few photos in this talk, which are photos I've taken from my various expeditions and in general have very tenuous links to what I'm talking about, but I thought it was a nice excuse to put them in. So back to the point, eventually things stop going quite to plan. And this is really important in the NHS. And there's been lots of work that's looked into essentially the state of retention and staffing and all of that. And this was a report published in just last year, 2019, titled A Critical Moment, NHS Staffing Trends, Retention and Attrition. And you probably remember the junior doctor strikes back in 2017, and the government put through this massive plan for 5,000 new GPs by, within the next 5 years. And this review last year found that there has been no progress towards the government target. And actually, the most recent data suggests numbers of GPs are actually declining. And this bit, the National GP Work-Life Survey, reported that 2 out of every 5 GPs intended to quit in the next 5 years. So that's a survey of 2,195 GPs, found 39% were likely to leave direct patient care by 2022. So that is a phenomenal number. And that's nearly double compared to the number that the equivalent number in 2005, which was only 19.4%. So obviously there's something that's going wrong. Let's look at obs and gynae training, 7-year program. You go in after foundation training, and the attrition rate from a 2016 review found that obs and gynae trainees, 1 in 5 doesn't complete their training. Again, something's going wrong. And that this is important because it's not just the doctor, the human on the end of that training program who is not completing their training for a very real reason, whether it's stress or unhappiness or something like that. It's got a huge impact on the NHS as well. So this was another report done in 2019 by Beach, and it showed that it said that essentially retention is necessary for greater workforce stability. And essentially it was saying that, the retention is a really big problem. It says 1 in 9 staff, that's 135,000 people left the NHS in 2017 to 2018. It also found this from a few other papers it looked at. It said happy, motivated staff who enjoy their job are less likely to leave. It said more engaged staff provide better, safer care and are less likely to be absent. And also said the average direct and indirect cost of replacing a member of staff in the NHS is £30,000. So if you think in 2017-18, that was 135,000 people who left the NHS, and the cost of replacing each one of those is about £30,000. Just think of the costs that are associated with essentially people being dissatisfied with their careers as they progress through their medical training. Hopefully that gives you some idea of the scale of the problem and the fact that actually it does happen to everyone. No one goes into a training program and thinks, I'm not going to finish it, I'm not going to come out the other side. The people who think that, they're smart enough to not get on the training program in the first place and do something else. And I'll go into some of those options a bit later. So it happens, it can happen to anyone. It happens to a lot of people, 40% of GPs, 20% of obs and gynae trainees. So something that we actually need to consider before it's too late and you've been unhappy for several years and then you're quitting your job. So essentially it comes down to a question of why. And why is this happening? And essentially it comes down to a very, very, very simple equation. And that is this philosophy that we are taught from a very young age, that if you work hard, that will lead to success, and that is what will lead to happiness. Great, seems sensible. It's the American dream. It seems like a tried and tested formula. But the trouble is it doesn't really work, because every time we work hard and we achieve a success, that becomes the new baseline. And so we have another new success that we need to find. And so the cycle starts repeating. And essentially happiness becomes this elusive entity that we never quite reach, because you work hard and you achieve a success, and then you have to work hard to achieve the next success. And every time you reach a success, your life circumstances have changed. And actually what, has taken you 2 years to reach by that point isn't actually what you want anymore or need. You've had kids by that time, and suddenly, being able to take unlimited time to go traveling isn't what you need. You need to have a stable income to pay the bills, and for example. And so back it goes, and you go around to the working hard cycle. And as a very, again, dubious analogy, but those underwater deep sea fishes that have a light that sort of dangles in front of them, they spend their whole life thinking, if I just swim a little bit harder, if I just swim that little bit faster, I'll eventually get to the light. They're never going to reach happiness, because it's always just that one step ahead. And so actually there was a chap called Sean Aker, who is a Harvard researcher, and he's a big advocate for positive psychology, who has done a lot of work and a lot of research around essentially this equation. And he's written a book called The Happiness Advantage. And essentially that says that success does come from hard work, but hard work has to have happiness that is fueling it. So if we can focus on the happiness first, then the hard work suddenly isn't so hard anymore. It becomes work we want to do and we're passionate about and we find easy. And when that's the case, the hard graft is something that we are desperately passionate about, then success is almost inevitable. And he's got loads of great statistics in his book, and he's also done a TED talk, which I thoroughly recommend watching. And one of the statistics he says, one of the pieces of evidence he says, is that when doctors were self-identifying as being in a good mood, they were 19% better at making faster and more accurate diagnoses than the ones who were burnt out. And this is been seen in lots of studies that correlate stress levels and performance. And so essentially we get to a point where we realize that having a successful career and being happy in life are things that can go hand in hand, but actually everyone's getting it wrong. And it's not about focusing on the hard work, it's about focusing on what makes you happy, because that is what is going to stimulate the hard work and drive the success in the future. So it seems like a really easy equation, really easy formula, just be happy and life will be great. And it seems so straightforward. Obviously, if it was that easy, we wouldn't be having worse rates of depression than we are now, more than ever, and all sorts of problems. And there's been a lot of research into why that's the case as well. And luckily, there's a few things that have been proven time and time again to have a really big impact on happiness. And essentially, there's two things. This is a little video I put in of climbing Mount Toubkal. So if you're always focused on the end goal, then the journey is going to seem terrible. But if you learn to enjoy the journey itself, then it doesn't even matter if you get to the summit or not. We did get to the summit there. It was amazing. So that's good. So coming back to it, happiness. There's two really big things that come to enabling happiness. And firstly, it's a positive mindset. And again, it sounds like a concept that's all very fluffy, but it's essentially the idea that, you know, if we have a positive mind, we think about things in a positive light, that eventually trains our minds to think more positively about things. We're more likely to feel happy. And there's a few things that are very, very well researched and shown to improve our mindset and generate a positive mindset over a negative mindset. Firstly, it's exercise. So if we exercise regularly, then that boosts our serotonin levels. It helps deal with loads of things, gets us outside, and that really boosts our happiness potential. Secondly is a social network, and this is a massive part of why society is struggling at the moment, and that's because a lot of our traditional social structures, even evolutionarily times, it would have been tribes, coming forward through the agricultural revolution, it would have been village networks, supporting each other with subsistence farming, and then coming through the Middle Ages and into very, very recent history, religion was and still is a huge part of people's social network. And people have this network, and it gives you a sense of belonging and a sense of family, and that is huge when it comes to people's mental health. However, a lot of these traditional social networks and true social networks are being broken down more than ever, partly as a result of the internet, which makes us more connected to lots and lots and lots of people, which means that we have more superficial connections with many people and less meaningful connections with a fewer number of people. So that's something to bear in mind. So having a really good social network is so important. And so if you're thinking, okay, you're going to get to the end of your foundation training and you're going to spend the next 10 years in a job where you're working nights and weekends, and you don't get a chance to have a social life, and you're bringing your work stresses back home to your family life, how do you expect your social network to be a solid foundation that's going to support you in your positive mindset? It's unlikely to happen unless you're very, very confident in your decisions that you've made and what you're doing in life. So that's something to bear in mind. And the third thing is, so the two things so far, they were exercising. The last thing is a positive outlook. And this comes to something known as the Tetris effect. And essentially, it's the idea that underpins neuroplasticity, or that's probably unfair, reducing neuroplasticity to a 1980s Game Boy game. Let me say neuroplasticity underpins the Tetris effect. And that is the idea that the brain is plastic and the brain can adapt and learn to new things. They did lots of studies in the 1980s on people who played a lot of Tetris and found that playing Tetris actually created a shift in the way their mind worked and the way they saw the world. And instead of dreaming about certain things, they would start having really vivid hypnagogic hallucinations almost of Tetris. And they actually tracked certain people with brain imaging studies more recently and found if they played Tetris for a certain amount of time every day, they would actually see changes in the MRI scans of their brains. And this is what underpins the positive outlook principle, which is that if we train ourselves to do something regularly, it becomes a habit. And the positive outlook is essentially about trying to see the positive in a bleak situation, trying to find the positive in every negative situation. And for me, I really like drawing a parallel to photography in this case. And I listened to a talk by Martin Hartley, who is an award-winning photographer, lead photographer for Sidetracked magazine. And I listened to a talk between him and Kenton Hall a couple of weeks ago. And he summed it up really nicely. He said, I hate taking photos on a blue sky sunny day. He said, they're so boring. I'll wait for the worst storm, the biggest blizzard. He specializes in Arctic stuff. So he says he'll wait for the worst storm, the biggest blizzard, when everyone else is, thinking how terrible the weather is. And he's like, absolutely the best opportunity to get some interesting photos. And what photography does is it teaches you to look at a situation that every other person would also see, and not necessarily pick out something. But if you're looking at it with a photographer's mind, you might notice that tiny little detail, or you might be able to look at a really terrible situation and turn it into an uplifting story. There's a way of looking at the world that's slightly different when you get into photography, and that mindset shift, which is being driven by the Tetris effect, means that you start seeing the world differently in everyday situations, even when you don't have a camera. And I really like this video because it's one that I took in the Sahara Valley in India. It's a night lapse. And it shows that if you look hard enough, and even into the darkest spaces, you will always find a positive message. And essentially it was very, very dark. It was very cloudy. It was very, very, very cold. And everyone was down in their tents. And I thought, the stars are there. It's a nice clear sky at times. There's a lot of clouds, but I'll see what happens when I take a photo for 90 minutes on a time lapse. And I don't know if you can see this, but let's have a look. I don't know if you can see, but there's loads and loads and loads of shooting stars just whipping across the screen there. And this is actually a time-lapse photo of the Perseids meteor shower, which happens every August, and it actually peaked last night, and it was very cloudy where I am, so I'm a bit disappointed. But it's throughout the whole of August and early September. If you have a nice clear night and you go out and look at the stars and you just stare at the sky for at least 20 minutes, half an hour, without using your phone, so it allows your eyes time to fully adjust, you'll see countless shooting stars. So if you've never seen a shooting star, now is the time to go and have a look. So those are the three things really. It's exercise, positive outlook, and a social network. So the second aspect of the unlocking the happiness potential is having a sense of purpose, and it's about finding your why. And this is something that so many people lack, and it's because we stop wondering what our sense of purpose is. We essentially go from asking why as children, why this, why that, why this, to asking what should I do next? What job am I going to do? How much money do I need to make? What are my options? It's not why anymore, it becomes what, and that really closes down our thinking. And we need to go back to how we were as children and ask why more to find out what our sense of purpose is. And I wanted to put up this slide because I thought it was quite interesting. Some of you might have heard of the 5 Whys machine. Essentially, it was designed by a chap in the early 1900s, a guy from Japan. And the idea is that if you ask why for a situation, that only gives you an immediate reason. You have to then ask why again to find out the sort of more underlying cause. And you have to ask why again and again and again until you get to the root cause. And that applies to finding a sense of purpose. It applies to trying to find what's driving a certain behavior, but it also applies when things go wrong, and it underpins the NHS's root cause analysis tool. So for example, take the situation of someone gets given IV morphine or oral morphine by the intravenous route, which is an RChem never event. If you ask why, you could say, oh, it's because the nurse drew it up into an IV syringe rather than an oral syringe, and you blame the nurse, and it's not very good. But if you ask why again, you find out that actually it's because they weren't stocking any purple syringes, what they're meant to be drawn up into. And you ask why again, and you find out that actually it's because the admin person responsible for ordering syringes is actually too tied up in looking after the rota that is so poorly managed, and so that she doesn't get around to ordering syringes. And then you ask why again, and so you go back and you find out that the real reason for why that person ended up getting a wrong route administration of morphine would be because it's nothing to do with the doctor or the nurse or the patient or the syringe. It's to do with the process that underpins it. And this methodology was designed by Toyota, and he's the chap who went on to develop Toyota, one of the most successful car manufacturing companies in history. and it underpins the NHS root cause analysis tool. And it is the tool that we should actually apply to ourselves and not just to systems. And so that leads me on to my next slide, which is about the end goal. You might remember sort of early on in the talk, I had the picture of the chap standing. It was actually Tim Mosedale. He's a legendary mountaineer who summited Amadablam, I think nearly 20 times now. I was with him in Ecuador in January, and it's this picture where you're standing at the end of a road and you've got the whole world ahead of you. And that's the situation we are in our mid-20s at this point. But people only ever focus on one outcome. And if you're a medic, a doctor, it's often, you want to become a consultant or a GP. But if you were to ask why that's the case, you get to some interesting conclusions, because it's an assumption. It's an assumption for most medics that they say, you go through medical school and you come out your foundation training, you specialize, and you want to become a consultant. Of course you do. Why would you not? But then if you ask why do you want to become a consultant, these are some of the most common answers that people give. It might be money. It might be flexibility. When I'm a consultant, I won't need to work so many night shifts. When I'm a consultant, I can take more days off. It might be familiarity. You might be disillusioned with the fact that you change departments every 4 months or 6 months. You just want to get to know stuff. You never feel like you really belong as a junior doctor rotating through certain places. And then there might be other reasons, because I think these 3 reasons, money, flexibility, and familiarity, they are genuine reasons, but they're not necessarily good reasons to become a consultant. And I'll come back to that. There are some good reasons why you might want to become a consultant. So people might want to develop an advanced skill set, and people might want to have the prestige of being a consultant. And these are all, good reasons. It might be really important to you that you have the title of consultant, or you have that advanced skill set. You become an expert in your field. And that is fine. That is absolutely a good reason to get on that training pathway and spend every day on the treadmill, just putting one foot in front of the other to get to that end goal. But as long as you've thought about it, and you've thought about why you want to be a consultant, and it's because you want to be an expert, and you thought about why you want to be an expert, and you've thought about, why that is, as long as you can answer that question, the root cause of why you want to become a consultant, then actually when you go to the end, pointless audit or whatever else, you are, you're going to be satisfied. So I'm going to put up a nice photo of Chimborazo here. So this is from Ecuador as well. And on this, there you go. So this photo from Ecuador, this is Chimborazo, which you may or may not have heard of, but this is actually the highest point on Earth. I'm sure everyone here has heard of Mount Everest, 8,848 meters high. So it's obviously the highest mountain on the planet. However, there are different ways of measuring it. And Chimborazo, just because of the way the Earth is bent and folded at the crust, the summit of Chimborazo is actually the highest point on Earth. It's the closest point on Earth to space. And it's got not a very good summit success rate. And I was climbing this back in January, and we didn't make it to the summit. But it was okay. It was an amazing trip. And actually for us, it was all about the journey, the whole experience of being in Ecuador, climbing the volcano, getting to know the country and the people. It was everything that goes around it. It wasn't just about getting to the summit, because otherwise you're setting yourself up for disappointment. That's what everyone does in medicine and in life. They decide that they want to be a consultant. They decide that they want to be, the CEO of their firm. They decide they want to be, a Band-Aid matron looking after the ward, whatever it is. They make these decisions, and they're just setting themselves up for failure, because actually a lot of the time that doesn't happen, as I showed you in the statistics from those studies before. So I just wanted to talk on a slightly more practical level of just opening people's eyes as to what else there might be. Obviously this is about extreme or expedition medicine, which I'm going to come on to a bit more, but it's not just expedition medicine. You've got to find your own why, your own sense of purpose. And for me, I'm lucky. I found, I love travel, I love photography, and I love medicine, especially pre-hospital medicine. So expedition medicine was the perfect answer for me. But that won't be the case for everyone. And the trouble is, when you're a medical student, you are often only given 2 options. It's a case of you get on the training pathway or you're never going to make it, essentially. That's what you're told. And you're told, oh yeah, you could take a year out, or you could take 2 years out, maybe go to Australia and, you know, live a little, and then you have to get on the training pathway. That's kind of the only option you're given, but it's absolute rubbish. And I've met so many people who inspired me who've not done that. And I made the sort of fairly brave decision, which was very scary, to not do that as well. But I just wanted to give you guys some indication of what the options are if expedition medicine isn't for you. So firstly, you can locum. So that is where you just essentially work agency shifts, and you essentially get paid much better than if you're on a training job. And, you know, if money is your motivation for becoming a consultant, well, I can tell you now that if you locum full time in your first year post foundation, you will earn as much money, almost as much money as a consultant in that first year, just by working as a locum. So if you actually wanted to set yourself up for life, it's better to earn that money now before you've got kids and other commitments and bills and mortgages. And, you know, and you can actually put away some of that money and invest in property, for example, you know, get your foot on the property ladder. So, you know, being a consultant for money is not necessarily the best reason. Junior clinical fellow jobs. So these are standalone medical jobs in hospitals, and pretty much every hospital has them, because there aren't enough training numbers. There's not enough budget to fill every single required post with a trainee doctor. So essentially they have these junior clinical fellow jobs, which are standalone jobs, and you can be quite flexible. So for example, after my second foundation year, I took on a junior clinical fellow job in the emergency department, and my job plan was 2 months off, followed by 4 months of 50% part-time, followed by 6 months of 30% part-time. And that was to allow me to do my expeditions. So it's very flexible. And then I did a few months of locuming, and then I decided actually I want to get some intensive care experience. So I found an intensive care junior clinical fellow job at another hospital, which was 50% part-time. You know, there's countless options, and I've got friends who've done junior clinical fellow jobs in education and in neurology research. My old housemate was doing a job in, you know, fantastic neurology centers, where he was essentially helping to run clinical trials alongside doing neurology clinics. And he's always wanted to be a neurologist, and he didn't have to wait till he was a consultant. You know, straight out of his foundation years, he was running clinics, you know, doing lumbar punctures, helping with clinical trials in a supported way. That meant he felt so much more fulfilled than deciding that you have to live a deferred life and wait 10 years. If you go into management and consulting, there's plenty of options there if you want to go non-clinical. There's all sorts of other parts of medicine that you don't get told about at medical school. So lifestyle medicine, which is becoming very popular these days with regards to like sports and nutrition and exercise, sleep, health, nutrition, aesthetics, wellness, and of course, expedition medicine, extreme medicine. There are so many categories here, and it doesn't just have to be emergency medics. I get asked this all the time on my Instagram. I get people messaging me saying, you know, I'm a nurse, can I do expedition medicine? You know, I'm a dentist, can I do expedition medicine? I've had a pharmacist message me recently. You know, all sorts of people who want to get involved, from, I think the youngest has someone like 16 who's thinking about going to medical school so you can do expedition medicine, all the way up to people who've spent half their life in the army. You've got so much more experience than me. And the world of extreme medicine is possible for anyone. There's a fantastic ophthalmological surgeon who does loads of humanitarian work and saves the eyesight of lots of people in Africa. Does loads of surgeries. There are humanitarian responses, and I listened to a talk with Javid, who's the president of MSF, a couple of weeks ago, and he said they employ pretty much every single specialty, and they employ pharmacists and nurses and doctors and dentists. You know, you name it, there is a possibility for you to do it. And the way you'll get to do it is by hitting pause on the treadmill, stopping for a minute and considering your purpose and considering your why. And eventually, when you find what does drive you and you knock on enough doors and discover your possibilities, you'll find something that works for you. And if you've already made up your minds, and many of you probably will have done because you're on this talk, that, you know, extreme medicine is the one, well, whether you want to be floating down a river in the Amazon, or, you know, going to the International Space Station, or diving, whatever it is, you know, climbing mountains, there is a place there for you. You just need to have the drive and the focus, and you'll get there. But you need to underpin it with a really strong sense of purpose. So there's loads of options. And a nice way of thinking about it is trying to frame your own sense of purpose if you're not really sure, is to think, okay, if this time next year you had to stand up on a stage and give a TED talk, what would your topic be on? And how would you like to be introduced? And if, when I said that to you, you thought, well, I know exactly what I would talk on, and that's your passion, you know, does that passion fit with going and doing a typical training program? And if it does, then brilliant. If it doesn't, then, you know, think about what your options are. Don't just get on the training program because that's what everyone tells you have to do. You don't. But if, when I said that, you had no idea, like, God, I've got no idea what I talk about, then that means you're lacking a sense of purpose, and you shouldn't just get on the treadmill because you don't have a clear answer as to why. And so you should probably hit pause and take some time to have a think and to explore and knock on a few more doors, discover what your options are until you do eventually find that sense of purpose. And so I'll come on a little bit about me. That I've been incredibly lucky with the expedition medicine in that I completely stumbled across it. I was working on a community drug and alcohol job at the time, and I'd used up all my annual leave to go on a holiday with my parents. But I was desperate to go skiing because I didn't manage to get any annual leave the year before to go skiing, and I really wanted to go skiing, but you know, it wasn't going to happen. So I started looking for essentially conferences and ski resorts, and I came across one. Thought that'll do. I can get some study leave for that. Booked on that, and thought, great, what an opportunity to go skiing. And that was a course on expedition medicine. And World Extreme Medicine has courses all over the world that you can use study leave for. So I sort of went to this course, not really thinking anything of it. And the first lecturer was someone called Dr. Lucy Obolensky. And she absolutely inspired me and sort of created this huge U-turn in my career, where essentially she started off life on the treadmill, and she went through medical school, foundation training, went through orthopedics, and got to ST6 or something of orthopedics training, and not far off being a consultant. And essentially at that point she was like, oh, this isn't what I do, what I want to do. You know, I want to be traveling the world. And you know, she had an interest in global health, and she set up a clinic in Kenya, and then got interested in emergency medicine, and then started doing expedition medicine. And she's not a consultant, but who cares? Because what she does do is she works as a GP part-time. She works a couple of days a month on the air ambulance. She works as a trust grade registrar with no responsibilities and better pay than any of the consultants in emergency medicine. And she's worked as David Attenborough's expedition doctor on Blue Planet and Planet Earth. You know, it's absolutely mind-blowing. And I was just stunned that this was even possible in medicine. In fact, I didn't even really know that traveling was possible with medicine until this point. So my mind was blown. And so I got back from that talk, and I was meant to be going to a surgical interview the next day from that conference. Sorry, I was meant to have a surgical interview the next day, the day after I got back, and I obviously just cancelled that and thought, you know, I'm not ready. I don't know why I'd be doing that. I haven't discovered my why yet. So I thought, okay, this is a door that has presented itself to me, and I'm knocking on this door, and I want to see where it goes. And I started applying for jobs, pinging off email after email after email, building up my experience in what I thought would be useful for expedition medicine. So I was joining event medicine companies, working in, you know, working at events like Tough Mudder and the European Championships, and building up that skill set to eventually then get my first job, which was on Mount Kilimanjaro. And this was my home for 3 weeks. It was a long trip. We spent 4 weeks on the mountain in total, looking after 6 groups. And that was my office for 3 weeks. It's certainly a lot better than an A&E department with no windows. And a lot of people do expedition medicine thinking it's an opportunity for a free little trip up Kilimanjaro on your year out, and then you get back on the treadmill. Well, I was saying, well, actually, you know, I loved this. It was some of the best weeks of my life. And the skills I developed on Kilimanjaro just immediately made me a better doctor. You know, I had to plan ahead for risk. I had to think about evacuation management, you know, risk management, you know, diagnosing altitude sickness with, you know, no kit apart from a SATS probe and a stethoscope, neither of which are particularly useful, by the way. And you know, you have to develop a real skill set that you don't have to develop as a doctor within the NHS. And ultimately, it made me a better leader, a better team player, you know, better diagnostician, better clinician. You know, there are so many skills that you can learn from expedition medicine that will make you a better doctor in your day job. And that's just the technical skills, because the other things you can learn are more important than just the technical skills. It can give you a sense of purpose. And I realized after doing Kilimanjaro and then getting my next job in the Sahara Desert and then to Everest Base Camp, that actually, you know, I want to do expedition medicine. I don't want it to just be a thing I dabble in for a year out while I, you know, before I go back to real life, as it were. I wanted that to be my real life. And so suddenly my whole mind shift changed and I had a completely different view of medicine. Suddenly it wasn't a means to an end. There wasn't a way of paying the bills, you know, a hospital that I had to go to. Suddenly it just represented this world of opportunity, which included, you know, working in humanitarian areas, you know, going to space, if, you know, that's possible, going to far-flung corners of the earth. This is from northern Pakistan. This is the Gondogorilla from Pakistan last summer. You know, getting to go to all these incredible places that I never, ever, ever thought in a million years I would be able to go to. And so I suddenly had a very different sense of purpose. But it wasn't just about traveling. It was actually the fact that, you know, I loved the medicine, you know, the diagnostic uncertainty, and the fact that you get all these transferable skills, the fact that you have, you know, potentially really unwell patients that you have to manage in a really harsh environment. You know, there's so much excitement and so much that you can glean from being a really good expedition doctor that you can use to take back to your practice in the hospital. And, you know, if you can imagine doing, you know, 100 eye surgeries, for example, in a minimally resourced setting in rural Africa, that's going to make you a much better eye surgeon when you're in state-of-the-art facilities in London. And, you know, if I've had to deal with someone with a SAPS of 48% on oxygen being carted down the side of Kilimanjaro or one of those trolleys with one wheel, you know, that's going to make me so much more comfortable dealing with patients who come in with a SAPS of 80%. And we've had quite a few of those recently. You know, there are so many skills that you can take from expedition medicine. And I'm a passionate advocate for it because it's not just meant I love my career. It's made me a much better doctor. Every single time I go into A&E, you know, it's not just, oh, it's another day at work. It's great. What am I going to see today? Am I going to see a shoulder dislocation? Am I going to see a chest pain? Am I going to see someone who's potentially had a, you know, some catastrophic headache or something like that? You know, all of these things that I might see on expedition, that means I can get that extra little bit of practice that will mean I'm a better doctor when I'm on expedition doing the thing that I love. And so that's why I think it's so important to find a sense of purpose and find happiness, because anything's possible. You just need to decide what you want to do and get out and do it. So just to recap, the first step is realizing we're all stuck on a treadmill. It doesn't matter what stage you are in life. It doesn't matter who you are, what your upbringing, you know, we're all on a treadmill of one sort. And once we can recognize our own treadmill, once we can appreciate that we're on a treadmill, that insight allows us to do something. Secondly, we need to flip our mindset. Hard work doesn't lead to success, which leads to happiness. It's actually happiness that needs to come first. And we need to focus on being happy with what we're doing, and the success will follow. Leading on to that is a positive mindset, which has exercise, social network, and positive thinking, and a sense of purpose. And lastly, it's about asking why. Going back to that childish mindset of asking why. And if you don't know what the answer is, then explore your options, because there are a million things you could be doing. And it would be a shame to just get on the treadmill because you haven't had the time or the energy to explore what else is out there. So hopefully that has given you some ideas. And now I think it's time for all of you to go out there and find your own why. Thank you.
Nathan, thank you very much indeed for your time this evening and for your insights. And we very much look forward to seeing you on the Platty Brennan course in November. And we run these live sessions every week. Please sign up for the next ones. And it's been a real pleasure having so many people from such a geographically widely spread audience, including Bolivia, which I do think is our first from Bolivia, having to join us. So Nathan, thank you for your time. Thank you everybody who's attended and listened to this for your time too. And we hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much.